Right. I'm Tamsin Thompson, the CEO of RIAS, and I'm absolutely delighted that tonight we are joined by Sir Geoff Palmer. Sir Geoff is, amongst other things, a scientist, an academic, and Chancellor of Heriot-Watt University. He was also Scotland's first Black university professor, but he's here today talking to us because over the last 15 years, Sir Geoff has been studying Scotland's links to slavery and particularly how it's manifest in our cultural institutions, our academic institutions, and the very fabric of our cities and the buildings themselves. So this is a really wonderful opportunity to hear from Sir Geoff about his work, research and thinking in that area. So there will be an opportunity for all of you to ask him your questions as well at the end. There is a Q&A function available as part of this talk, so please do write your questions in there, and I will, at the end of his talk, read those out to him and we can go through those. We intend to finish today's event at around 7 p.m. So you know where you are. But without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to be handing over to Sir Geoff and to hear more about his work and thoughts. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And, it's a great honor to be speaking to the organization. I think that I'm just a botanist. And then I've done some work on grain, cereals, especially barley. And however, in 2007, it was the commemoration of the abolition of the slave trade, 200 years. And I organized a walk from Musselburgh to Inverness Lodge. I don't know why I chose that, but I'm sure it has something to do with the Wetherburn family, in that the James and John Wetherburn were the sons of Sir John Wetherburn, and he was taken to London and hanged after the Battle of Culloden. And those boys stayed in Jamaica from about 1746 until they came back to Scotland in the 1770s. And they made a lot of money there. And James Wetherburn bought Inverness Lodge. And thus I felt, walking from Musselburgh to Inverness Lodge would be a good way for us to commemorate the 200 years of the abolition of the slave trade, because John Wetherburn and James were both significantly involved in the slavery in Jamaica. Now, the walk went very well. In fact, the descendant of James Wetherburn, is actually his son, a mixed race son, visited him in Inverness Lodge, and he gave him a pint of beer, I think, and a sixpence, and told him to go away. However, that boy, descendant, Robert Wetherburn, the boy was called, but the mixed race young man, he had descendants, and one of his descendants, Lord Bill Wetherburn, contacted me, and he and his wife came to that walk. And Lord Bill Wetherburn, looks like a white person, but he really respected his ancestor, the mixed race son of James Wetherburn, who was called Robert Wetherburn. So from that time in 2007, I decided to have a closer look at this link between Jamaica, for example, and Scotland. And one of the first things I did, sort of lateral thinking, having done a bit of research, is that I sent to Jamaica for a Jamaica telephone direction. And when it arrived, I was absolutely taken aback with the contents of the Jamaica telephone directory, because over 60% of the names in it were Scottish surnames. And I counted the Campbells, and there were more Campbells in the Jamaica telephone directory than they were in the telephone directories of Edinburgh and the Lothian. And that gave me some incentive in terms of looking at this history even more carefully than when I started, because somehow there is a link, and things cropped up like, you know, Jamaica Street in Glasgow has been there since 1763. When I asked people how long do you think it's been there, a lot of people said, you know, their view was like about 1950. The point is that Jamaica Street was an important commercial street in terms of coffee and sugar coming from Jamaica during slavery to Scotland. And therefore, you know, I thought there are other aspects of this which we could do, but what I'll focus on today, because of time, is that because it was the commemoration of the abolition of the slave trade, I decided to focus on the slave trade to a great degree. And of course, when we talk about the slave trade, when people talk about slavery in the Caribbean, they often refer just to the slave trade. You know, they don't just talk about slavery, because the slave trade, to be truthful, is only a part of that slavery. You know, the slaves were bought and sold, you know, in the Atlantic slave trade, where Africans were moved from Africa to the Caribbean in very, very large numbers. I think I saw some figures where, you know, at one time it was about 40,000 a year. And in the Caribbean, at about 1800, there were about 800,000 British slaves in the Caribbean, 800,000. And there were 300,000 in Jamaica, 300,000. And Jamaica was providing, despite it didn't have half the number of slaves, it was providing over 50% of the financial income. And Jamaica was producing sugar and coffee. And, you know, we have therefore various links. For example, coffee, Jamaica coffee, you know, has got strong historical links with Scotland, especially what we call, you know, Blue Mountain, where the coffee was produced. However, what I'm going to focus on for the rest of the time is the management of that slave trade. Now, in my readings of it, and what I understood as a boy in Jamaica, you know, I didn't have a formal education. I went to a church school, which was called elementary. But we were told about that William Wilberforce abolished the slave trade. And if I ask a question, how many people have heard of William Wilberforce and the abolition of the slave trade? I think most people would say, yes, I've heard of William Wilberforce and the abolition of the slave trade. But in 2007, because a lot of people know more about the slave trade because of the work which a lot of people have been doing. However, if you said in 2007, or not even as far back as that, you've heard of William Wilberforce and the abolition of the slave trade, but have you heard of Henry Dundas and the abolition of the slave trade? Now, many people would probably have said no. Because, and this is the nature of this history, which is absolutely clear in just those two names. Because as far as the British slave trade and its abolition, is concerned, you cannot speak about William Wilberforce without speaking of Henry Dundas. And therefore, I decided I knew a bit about Wilberforce, but I knew nothing about Henry Dundas. And once I start reading about Henry Dundas, I went to his statue in St. Andrew Square, and I read the plaque. And Adam Ramsey was also looking at the plaque. And, I came to the conclusion that this plaque is not accurate, because the word slavery or slave trade that they were not on that plaque. And I felt it is, therefore, what's on that plaque is not altogether true. And it should be changed. Edinburgh Council took notice of what myself and Ramsey were saying, and they set up a committee. And on that committee, this is about 3 years before the death of Floyd in 2020. And we were looking at the old plaque and thinking about the new plaque. And there were 4 of us on that committee, if I remember it. And there was a councillor who was chairing. And there was myself, Ramsey, the present Viscount Melville Dundas. Henry Dundas was Viscount Melville I, and the present Viscount is the 10th. So he was on the committee, and the historian Michael Fry. So the 4 of us, Fry, Melville, Ramsey, and myself. And we debated this for over 2 years without success. And the council decided, just before the death of Floyd, was to abandon the committee because we couldn't come to a consensus about the wording. And in a very sad way, Floyd was killed by policemen over 9 minutes. And, the world stood still for a bit, because what they were witnessing was a consequence of slavery, a consequence of the past, because nothing could justify somebody killing somebody else, both human beings, over 9 minutes. And one calling for his mother, and the other with his hands in his pocket, looking round, as if, I'll get away with this. The point is that increased the activity of the Black Lives Matter organization. And I was asked to give a talk near the Parliament, the Scottish Parliament. And I referred to the Henry Dundas statue, how we had failed to arrive at a narrative, a new one for that plaque, which included slavery and the slave trade. And the audience, were very supportive. And I think it was the following week, I had a phone call from the leader of Edinburgh Council, Councillor McVeigh. And he said, Geoff, could you join this committee? Because we're going to have a look at the plaque. And I joined, because I felt this was so important and encouraging. And I joined that committee, and within a week, we had a new narrative for that plaque. And the new narrative became temporary, and now it is permanent. It is on Dundas' statue. And it really starts by saying, that Henry Dundas, is delay of the abolition of the slave trade caused over 500,000 Africans to be transported into slavery. 500,000. My calculation was about 630,000, based on 40,000 a year, something like that. But nevertheless, the point is that the word slavery, after over 200 years, the word slavery was now on that plaque, and slave trade was on that plaque. Now, if one were to, we're not just saying that Dundas only was responsible for the delay in the abolition of the slave trade. There's a lot of debate, as you know, about the plaque, and a survey has just been carried out because a committee has contacted the council to say that the plaque is not correct and it should be removed. And the council put out a notice for people to respond to. And, for those who want to remove the plaque and those who want it to remain. And the final score, without going into any detail, thankfully, as far as I'm concerned, it was 199. The people wanted the plaque to remain, and 74 wanted to be removed. So I don't know what the council will do in terms of that response, but I was so pleased that, we were in the majority. But the argument is that, but Dundas didn't do it on his own. Well, I think, to me, that is not what I call an academic argument. Of course, in politics, where you're dealing with aspects of the law, individuals don't finally do everything on their own. And also, the plaque says Dundas was instrumental. It didn't say Dundas did it on his own. It did not. And for academics and scholars to be trying to put that argument forward is, I just think it's unfair to what the council describes on the plaque as. This plaque is dedicated to those who suffered. And I think it's disrespectful to those people to try and invent an excuse such as that. The point is that Dundas initiated the amendment in 1792. Wilberforce's bill said that the slave trade should be abolished immediately, supported by the Prime Minister Pitt. Dundas amended it. His amendment was that the slave trade should be abolished gradually. And that one word delayed the abolition of the slave trade for 15 years, from 1792 1852 to 1807. And during that period, I don't have one evidence, neither as the opponents, what Dundas ever did to effect abolition during that delay. The point is that if you look at the evidence, and I believe, having done a little bit of research, there's a difference between somebody believing something as opposed to a belief which is supported by valid evidence. And the analogy I give to my students on that is that, there are two planes on the runway. One is made by somebody who believes they can build a plane, and the other one is built by somebody who's been trained to build a plane. Which one would you fly? So people have those kinds of beliefs if it's not going to do them any harm. But the very fact it does other people harm, it doesn't seem to bother some people. And therefore, I really believe that we must base what we do on evidence, especially in history. But somebody told me, I went and gave a talk somewhere in Scotland, I won't say where, and somebody said, well, history isn't like engineering because you don't need to have the same truth or the same evidence. And therefore, what we have is a situation where this politician, very powerful, who was called, the uncrowned King of Scotland, Henry IX, and allowed to manage Scotland, he was instrumental in, the Scottish martyrs being transported to Australia. He was involved in, the British Army's attack in San Domingo, that's Haiti. He was responsible for the loss of about 40,000 British troops, 40,000, during that period in an effort to destroy the French slavery industry because he didn't want it competing with the Jamaica slavery industry, which was just down the road in the Caribbean. He sent governors out to the Caribbean. Earl Balcarres, he made him governor of Jamaica. Ninian Home, he made him governor of Grenada. He was president of the Board of Control, so he controlled the East India Company, where it was just patronage. Prime Minister Canning calls Dundas's action, I think it was pillage and patronage. The politicians at the time, people like the Prime Minister, in 1792, in his speech, which is checkable, if you check Pitt's speech, it's probably the longest speech ever made in Parliament. Pitt actually said, referring to gradual, what the gradual mean. I don't know why we're debating it today, because the Prime Minister said in 1792, gradual meant waiting for a contingency, refusing to act until 1,000 favourable circumstances unite together. Waiting till 1,000 favourable circumstances unite together. That meant never. The point is that all that is there. We can see that in history books. It was never quoted by a historian. The point is that, he was involved in all kinds of those machinations which I've spoken about in terms of slavery and colonialism. His governors, Home and Balcarres, for example, became slave owners. So they were governing their island, but were active slave owners. In fact, my family still live, my family lives on a section of Earl Balcarres' plantation, one of them, Marshall's Pen. Marshall Pen. If you type in Marshall Pen on your phone, you will get it in Manchester. And I've been to Marshall's Pen to see where my family lives today. It's a piece of land which is at that time was very good for growing coffee. Now it doesn't grow anything except, a little bit of food, vegetables, etc. The point is that this history is still alive. And what I would say is that we cannot change the past, but we can change consequences, such as racism, for the better. Those involved, like Dundas, in the prolonging of this slavery for financial means. Dundas says in his speeches, which I've got some of them, I've got a son in London who has sent me original speeches. God knows where he bought them. But the point is that Dundas actually stated the financial benefits of slavery in Jamaica. He also, in fact, said, he would not vote for abolition of the slave trade until some guarantee could be given to the slave owners in terms of the protection of their fortunes. It's written. He also, when he was asked about, how is he going to manage the military situation in Haiti, he got Balcarres to recruit slaves for the British Army. And after the event in Haiti, the slaves returned to Jamaica and they re-enslaved them. So the evidence that he was deeply involved in this slavery, there is no question about it. And I've asked the people who opposed, my views to provide counter evidence, and they've not done so. The point is that, the public can check, and that's what I love about the media per se, because, if you say something, then some people can go and check it. The point is there is a memorial which is written by Coburn, Coburn Street. Coburn is a nephew of Henry Dundas. And Coburn described him, in no uncertain terms, as a dictator and a despot. And Michael Fry's book, the historian on the committee who didn't want the plaque changed, Michael Fry's book is called The Dundas Despotism. But then he was writing a book putting down what Dundas did, like wanting to breed young girls in slavery in order to keep the slavery going if the slave trade was ever abolished. Fry has that in his book, but I don't know whether that seems to be okay showing power. The point is that to me, he wasn't representing the Scottish people. And this is part of the issue, that some of these people who are against me and against the new plaque believes that they are protecting the Scottish people. The Scottish people, in my experience, want the truth. And I'll give you an example of that. I did the Antique Roadshow, and I talked about silver bowls, sugar bowls. And I said, these bowls, Georgian, one Scottish, one English, were made to take sugar, made by the people who had a lifespan of less than 10 years because of the horrors of slavery. And when I went to the local supermarket the next day, the people who work in the supermarket said it's one of the first times they've ever really understood what slavery was about. Just that statement. The point is that the people have not been given the the whole truth about our slavery in the Caribbean. And I think that it must go into the curriculum. So this is the only way we're going to change attitudes, in a sense that, you know, the education and equality, to me, education, equality, and progress go together. And we have to teach the horrors of racism. If we look at, you know, the racism that is a consequence of slavery, we must teach and understand the origins. And I was looking at it only a day or two ago. And the fact is that when we look at Shakespeare's use of race, it's about, you know, type. That's how it sort of like started, you know, different types of people. You know, when Morocco came in The Merchant of Venice, he said, "Mislike me not for my complexion." He was alluding to race, but it wasn't about, you know, racism per se. He was just saying, that's my difference, that's my type. However, you know, from the 1600s, that change in the 1700s to a difference in terms of superiority and inferiority. There was no superior and inferiority per se in Othello in that 1600. But by the time we get to the 1700, we have David Hume saying Negroes are inferior to whites. Negroes are inferior to whites. And Kant picked it up later on, you know, the 1750s, you're talking about 1770s. Kant tacked it onto race. So the Negro race was inferior to the white race. And that was used to drive slavery in the 1790s, the later 1700s. Thus, we got gradual abolition of the slave trade, because basically the view then was Negroes, if inferior to whites, then it was okay to enslave them. You know, it was okay to enslave them because they were inferior. And therefore, we had a slavery which was legal, thus moral, and that's why it had to be abolished. The whole slavery, not just the slave trade. Slave trade was abolished in 1807 after Henry Dundas was impeached in 1806. I'm not citing a link, but what I'm saying is that Dundas was impeached in 1806 for the manipulations of Navy money. The irony was he was impeached by Samuel Whitbread, MP abroad. The point is that 1807, the slave trade, 1838, the total abolition of slavery. And in 1833-34, before the final abolition, the slave owners legally were given 20 million for their property, their slaves. And that 20 million then, 1833-34, is equivalent to about 20 billion today, 20 billion. So what we have is a situation where we know that history is there. It cannot be changed. You can't change that. But as I said, we've got the consequences of racism. And I touched on that by saying where it really came into full was when Hume said Negroes were inferior to whites, and Kant said the Negro race was inferior to the white race. And in the 60s, if we now bring it to our time, in the 60s, I arrived in this country in 1955 as a boy of 14 years and 11 months. And my mom was taking me to work because that's what she said she worked for from 1951 to 1955 to save £86 to bring me here. And when I came, I didn't realize she wanted me to go to work. And she tried to take me to work, but the immigration officers told her that an officer told her that I wasn't 15 and I had to go back to school. And in London, in Islington, she took me to a school that said I was educationally subnormal because they gave me a test. And I had to go to the secondary modern school, which was fine because I was very good at cricket and got transferred to the grammar school because of my cricket in Edinburgh. However, it took Professor Chapman at Leicester University, Professor Chapman at Leicester University, to get me into Leicester. Let's do that again. Professor Chapman at London University to get me into Leicester University, because I was working for Professor Chapman in 1958 as a junior laboratory technician. So in 1958, I was working at London University, Queen Elizabeth College, as a junior laboratory technician, and Chapman gave me a day off. And I got my A-levels, but I couldn't get into a university. Chapman got me into Leicester University. And I came to Edinburgh after that. I had an awful interview where somebody told me I should go home and grow bananas. I did point out it's difficult to grow bananas in Haringey, because then I was expressing my sense of belonging, in that unless I can grow bananas in Haringey, I'm going nowhere. So again, it was that form of powerful racism. And that was before race laws, because this was 1964. However, I had an interview in Edinburgh with Professor Anna MacLeod, a wonderful woman, and she took me and I did my PhD with her. The point is that, and since that time, the research I've done on barley and traveling abroad for the British brewing and distilling industries and the British grain industries, I think may have been of some value to the country. And I've taught many, many students, and some of them have done very well. I think I did teach one of the owners of the Brewdog Beer Company. The point is that without people helping me along the way to avoid and not be knocked down by racist attitudes that you're inferior, I would still be in a situation where I know many of the boys who came with me and are in London, some of them family members, some have passed away, have really been subjected to this awful prejudice, this invention, because you made it up. It's an invention. Kant made it up. It's an invention. The point is that there is no evidence, and Nature, the elite journal, only a couple of weeks ago, published that there is no scientific basis to race. And some may be sitting saying, yes, you know, there are different races, yeah, whatever. I'll say, I'll give you a minute to define race. No, we don't have time. But the fact is that nobody's ever been able to define race in that time period. It shows, therefore, we have a word, which is a consequence of the past, which we can't even define. But it's destroyed the lives of millions of people and still is an issue, preventing proper representation in our society. And therefore, to me, we have a society which is diverse. And, you know, a diverse society without diverse management cannot be fair or efficient. And therefore, what we must work for is set up outcomes, equality outcomes, equal opportunity outcomes, so that we can ensure that people can take, these opportunities. So we have a society where, the management can take great benefit from the different input which we can all give in order to make our society a fairer and better place to live. And what is wonderful about that, I just heard today that, the council also set up a committee to look at Edinburgh's links with slavery and colonialism, and that report was submitted just a few weeks ago. And I'm told that tomorrow, the first recommendation of that report, there were 10 recommendations. One is to do with this history being in the curriculum. The first recommendation, though, is the one which will be dealt with tomorrow, I'm told. And the first recommendation was an apology for this history in terms of slavery and colonialism, and, in fact, the consequences of it. And therefore, thank you all very much for listening, but I will just end by saying, the consequences of the past. We can say the past, forget it. Yes, let's say that, but let's deal with the consequences of the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very inspiring. I had the pleasure and the honor of speaking to you for this event. It's the work that you've done and the insight that you provide on this is really overwhelming, as well as your positivity, particularly about the numbers around the plaque. Personally, I think that 74 people wrote in negatively is pretty shocking and upsetting, but I'm glad you can be positive about the 199 that wrote in the other way, and that in itself is inspirational as well. We have a couple of questions from our attendees, and the first, I guess, is quite broad, but they're asking, what do you think the next steps are in your campaign?
Oh, I think the next step is to inform the public as much as possible, and I'm doing that just about every day. I've got to give a talk somewhere, and I think that is very important. I can do all the history work, and I can have the great debates, about this history, but when somebody asks me to give a talk, sometimes it's very difficult, because after this, then I've got to go to London on the 1st of November, and I'm going there again on the 29th of October, because people are watching what we're doing up here. They believe we're ahead. Somehow the fudging is still elsewhere. And I think that what we need to do, all of us, is that, we have various things which I would say not true. Mm-hmm. And one organization I'm dealing with, have actually said they're going to start the anti-racism in the organization. However, all the training they've had so far, nobody will mention you. Nobody mentions Cat. Nobody will mention certain things. That nobody will mention, Smith, Adam Smith, in a sense that he said, okay, slaves should be paid. But he didn't say that slavery itself should be removed immediately. So you don't have to worry about that, about paying slaves. And therefore, that has to be addressed, or else people will still continue this belief that one group of people is inferior to the other. We're one humanity, nothing less.
And I was really struck when we spoke prior to this, sort of touched on it in your talk today. You're very much advocating not to remove these names or not to remove these statues, but to contextualize them. And as you can see behind me, we have all our male presidents for the last 125 years across the walls of the room. And we as an institute are having a different but similar conversation about them. But it was just interesting exploring that a little bit more with you and hearing for the audience today, a little bit more of your thinking on that.
Well, I think that I was asked that ages ago, and if I'd said yes, remove the statues, I wouldn't be here doing all this work. I obviously said the wrong thing. But what I did say, don't remove them, because if you remove the evidence, you remove the deed. And the point is that the statues, like buildings, etc., are part of the context of the area. They are part of that history of that area. Dundas' statue is part of the history of St. Andrew's Square. You take it away, you've removed the link between Dundas and the Earl of Hopetoun, which has a statue across the road at the Dundas House. And Dundas House was owned by Lawrence Dundas, a relative of Henry Dundas. So you've got the Earl of Hopetoun, Lawrence Dundas. Dundas was married to the Hope of Hopetoun, into that family. You're going to remove that. You've got over the road, just behind Dundas, is the linen bank. That was involved with linen, which, clothes, you had to provide clothes for the slaves, and that was extremely profitable for Scotland. Links up with Dundee. The point is that you have Henry Brougham just across the road, which Henry Brougham was an abolitionist, and and he's associated with the Edinburgh Literary Review. And therefore, if you remove that statue, it also looks down George Street, which has multiple links with slavery. So the point is that taking Dundas' statue away, you're changing the history of that area. And I've checked, and the irony is, when Dundas was impeached, I've just found that out. When he was impeached, many slave owners went down to Arniston House to give their sympathy. And he got letters from the family, the Hope of Hopetoun. However, it says that there was celebration in St. Andrew's Square because of his release from the impeachment. He didn't go to jail, although it ended his career. The point is there were celebrations, and thus that statue is there for very significant reasons. Because when he was alive, there were celebrations there. The point is that architecturally and etc., it has tremendous social importance, its position. So no, the statues, buildings, anything should be left with a plaque explaining to the public, so the public can go and educate themselves. And for your paintings behind you, you leave them where they are and put up a plaque.
We've got a sort of flood of questions coming in. I'll try and work through some of them. I think I know what you're going to say on this, but one here about the new town. And the question is, Edinburgh prospered when slavery was at height and when Dundas was at his most powerful. Yeah. Have you or others done any work to establish the scale of that sort of investment and how much of it's linked to the new town and I suppose other areas? I think the answer is yes, but maybe you could say a little bit about that.
In our report, we the new town was included as a feature, and some of the properties there, like Bute House and etc. The house of James Buchanan. People like that linked to the Buchanans of Buchanan Street in Glasgow, Jamaica Street, India Street. The point is that the Botanic Garden. The point is that there were at least 74 houses in the new town which were on the slave compensation list or got compensation. So history's there. You just got to look. The point is that Raymond lived in the new town and he painted a lot of these slave owners. So again, you can expand it by looking at the Royal College of Physicians is in Queen Street, and the importance of slavery is that a lot of doctors, Scottish doctors, went to the Caribbean. It was a great career opportunity because people might beat their slaves to death if they're bad, but they want the good ones to live as long as possible. So they had a great plethora of doctors in the Caribbean. And one of them, for example, William Wright, I think, was president of the College of Physicians. And, he became president when he came back from Jamaica, and he was a slave owner. And the medical school, the infirmary, had slave money input. So the history of the new town is replete with evidence in association with it. If you go on Ford Street, which is called Little Street, I think 24 Ford Street is on the slave compensation. 12 as well, number 12. They're both on it. And you can see the difference between those two houses. 24 has a balcony. None of the other houses on Ford Street has a balcony. 24 has. That's its slavery money. Makes that difference. And 12 has two front doors. 12. I think it may be, I don't know whether it's going whether it's 12A or 12B, but at one time that was one house. So I should imagine the powers that be went through one, and the maids and slave maids went through the other, the servants. But there are two doors at number 12. And on Albany Street, a house there, maybe 56, I'm not sure, has a beautiful large plaque of whether it's copper, etc. But all those houses are on and those are just, and there are other houses there much more significant than those. But it shows you the difference. I think the 24, it's the one with a balcony on the first floor outside, and the gate and the railings are different. They're like unique. They're not exactly the same as the railings on the other houses on that street. So again, slavery money made that difference in the architecture.
Yeah. And I suppose that was kind of my final question for you. We've got loads of questions in there, but we're sort of running out of time. But I suppose the question, a lot of our audience tonight will be architects or working in and around architecture. And I just wondered what your sort of sense of what that should mean for us working in architecture today. What can we learn and what should we be doing and thinking about when, particularly I suppose when we're working on these buildings and in these areas?
I think what you could do is to, for example, I'm not an architect. I just observe those little differences. Like 24, which has got definitely a difference, and nobody would know what that difference relates to. Nobody. And thus, I think it is a shame that those differences are missing.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be interesting to find those houses in the new town. Do research. You can look up the slave compensation list and find those houses and see how are there any difference between them, and who owned them, and what links did these people have. And you'll find that a lot of women owned houses because they were left by relatives for them, for their security. So again, they have this great social impact that uncles and whatever were looking after relatives. So this was part of the legacy. Not like, the Gallery of Modern Art was a slave master's house.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that, which is so obvious. Or if we look at the money invested in, the university received money from slavery. In fact, when Frederick Douglass was in Edinburgh, one of his taunts was send back the money to the new church. If you're not going to help abolish slavery in America, you should send back the money which you received from slavery. So I think that people use one of those houses. I've checked, in 1838, I saw it, a new town in Melville Street. In say 1838, it was worth less than 2,000. It's over, I think, a couple of million now. So if you look at the prices of those houses owned by slave owners who were under compensation list, and look at how much they're hurt today, you will get some idea of the benefits of the slave. Architecture is a good way of assessing that. The owners then and the price now. The purchase price then, purchase price now. That would be very, very important aspect of the importance and the economics of slavery.
I can see a walking tour coming up from this.
Well, that's right. I think there is a walking tour already, but I think that if you could get those properties and then evaluate them, the cost of them, it's not only about money.
Yeah.
It's also about people. But that would make a good study, because if you say that to people, they can see it. Great big debate about Dundas's motives are very difficult for people to pick up. But things like absolutely. That would be absolutely, with photographs and stuff, and it would be a very important little project.
Well, thank you ever so much for your time this evening, speaking to us. We really, really appreciate it. And I feel like you've given us lots of strands that we now should be following up.
Well, architecturally, it's interesting. Because it's about architecture. I've just come back from Leicester, and it's rather embarrassing. I'm not saying this for any reason, but I went down there and I didn't, and when I saw they had stuck my name on an enormous building at Leicester University. And I think, well, how much, the total complex is worth 125 million. And the architecture is just remarkable. They built a group of accommodation buildings, and on it, they put names of certain people up, and I was honored really to have that. So architecture is a critical aspect of trying to effect change in attitude.
It is, because, you know, among other things, it has that permanence, doesn't it? You know, we're talking about a statue that's however many years old, you know, it's
buildings, etc. You know, 24 Fort Street has been there from 1838. I can tell that because it's on the list.
yeah.
So no, I'm honoured to have been asked by you, and I hope what I said made, you know, some value.
Absolutely, and I feel we may be in touch again to explore how we can develop some of this with you further, and also very much how we and our membership can support your further work in this area in Edinburgh and elsewhere.
Thank you. The public appreciates all this work because it is their city, it is their place, and they don't know. And it's incumbent upon, you know, people who know more than I do to try and inform them, and that they want this. Because it gives them a greater appreciation of where they live. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. So, thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight, and see you again soon. Thank you.